Okay, we are on.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Today is Wednesday, January 18th, and this is the meeting of the House Rules Committee. I'm going to turn it over for a roll call.
Chair Fogerty.
Here.
Vice Chair O'Brien.
Here.
Vice Chair Zerpa.
Here.
Representative Azanaro.
Present.
Representative Corvasi.
Here.
Representative Diaz.
Here.
Representative Kazirian.
Here.
Representative Kennedy.
Here.
Representative Markowski. Representative McNamara.
Here.
Representative Newberry.
Here.
Representative Phillips.
Present.
Representative Place.
Present.
Representative Shanley.
Present.
Representative Slater. Leader Chippendale.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Great, thank you so much. And before I start the committee hearing today on the testimony on the bills on today's agenda, I'm going to ask for a motion to hold all the bills on today's agenda for further study. And I'd like...
Second.
It's been moved and seconded, but I'd like to remind the committee that the vote in favor of holding all bills for further study is not substantive, and it does not signify any position on the merits of the bills. The motion and vote are procedural only and simply helps organize the bills for hearings by allowing the committee sufficient time to review both the verbal and written testimony. Okay, so we have a motion that's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? So there is one opposed. We have that documented, okay? All right, so we are going to start off with my bill, which is House Bill 5051. And this is the House resolution adopting the rules of the House of Representatives for the years 2023 and 2024. And again, in Article 6, Section 7 of the Rhode Island Constitution, changes of the House of Representatives rules by representatives were determining its rules of proceeding. The changes proposed in H 5051 are intended to improve the efficacy and clarify current practice and preserve the decorum of our proceedings. I will walk through the changes on the course, and if there's any question, you can certainly stop me and ask as we move along, okay? So we're going to start with page 3 on rules, under Rule 7D. There is a change here that adds ceremonial resolutions of congratulations and condolences to the 7D exceptions. I don't know if anybody has any questions. We just think that's probably a good place for that to be put under. Okay, so it's exempt, so you can do that whenever you want to do that. Okay? Any questions with that?
Yes, maybe a simple question.
Sure.
We don't have to ask any of the leaders now for permission?
Oh, no, we still have to ask for permission, but it doesn't require 7D.
Okay.
Okay? All right? So it's important to recognize when, and there's no time frame for it, so it's important to recognize whenever these events happen that you would like to do that, okay? So we will move to page 5, and this is Rule 10A. And this point is upon his or character upon the House in general that appears in the press, or it's white knocked out here, or white, so stricken, thank you, or other public medium, but not to discuss favorable references to him or himself. This clarifies that the members claiming the floor for points of personal privilege may respond to derogatory statements made in the press. So the press is the statement of record, the news, again, somewhere that we can stand on the floor and say that we object to it. But we're just going to say that it's going to be the news or on some type of a TV news. But if this is going to get into Twitter or Facebook or any of those other platforms, that's not going to take place on the floor. Those are other platforms where other type of derogatory, as we've seen quotes and comments come up. We're not going to let people go on the floor and try to clean that up, because again, it's a different forum that we really have no control over. More of the news and the papers and television have editors that are looking over their shoulder, so if there's something written or placed in that type of a forum, that yes, you can address that on the floor. Is that clear? Is there any questions regarding that? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
I just want to point out that
I just want to... 10B, I'm very pleased. It used to be 9B, but certainly for us, it is, I think, one of the most relevant section of our rules, and certainly it's one of my favorites to keep in mind relating to the way we treat each other and the question of integrity with fellow members. Very important if we are going to remain a civil body. So I'm pleased to see that once again included, and it's moved up in rank to number 10. It used to be number 9, so that's positive. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So again, any other questions on the rule change on 10, under 10? Hearing none, I'm going to move on. Pardon me as I go through. A lot of paper here. Sorry.
Chairwoman,
Next is, oh,
just have
I'm
a quick
sorry.
question. I lost track because I know you've got the paper copy.
Yes.
What page were we just on? Are you going through it chronologically?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
page
I thought I
5.
might, oh, thank you.
So next is on page 10, and it's Rule 12N, and it removes the rule allowing House members to carry over bills into the second session of the legislative term. It was found that, we put that in last year, that there was some confusion because the Senate side didn't do that. Numbers were not being easily traced back and forth, so there was confusion about bills. So we're just going to go back to the old way where instead of continuing a bill, you just submit your bills for each year. Just for clarification, because the Senate side did not do that. And for our clerks and our legal departments, it became a big confusing point. So if there's any questions on that, go ahead, Representative.
No, I just want to say, as someone that was in favor of the original change 2 years ago and then watched it in practice, I think removing this is a very good idea.
Okay.
For a variety of reasons I won't get into because it doesn't seem to be controversial, but it's good that we're getting rid of this.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on that? No?
Chairwoman, I would agree on this one. I had one of those bills which I tried to actually carry over, and apparently there was a deadline that I wasn't even aware of, which nullified the fact that the bill couldn't be carried over, so I just ended up reintroducing it. Probably works just as easily
Just
reintroducing
easily,
it.
right, and you get the new number for the new year, and again, less confusion, and nothing's missed. Okay? So, if no other questions, I will move on to the next change, which is on page 11. I'm sorry.
Skipped number 3.
Oh,
The changes in number 3, page 10,
I apologize.
grammatical correction.
Oh. Okay, yes, and there is a grammatical correction on page 10 about recusing himself or themselves, which is not really a true word. So it has been changed to has recused. So that is page 10 and under item line 13, yes. Line 13. Okay? So we watch proper English as we're doing our work here on the floor. Okay? So next we will move to page 11. And this is under Rule 14A. And this is just a punctuation change and clarifying a current practice relating to duplicate Senate bills. All right. Have any questions regarding that? Clarifying current practice. Okay. Hearing none, I will move on to page 14. And under page 14, this is Rule 15, item D, deadline change for submission of amendments to the Legislative Council from 3 p.m. to 12 noon. Only because Leg Council has found that sometimes, coming in at 3 p.m. and trying to get it on the floor for 4 p.m. Is not really workable. And if there's a lot of other things going on, it's not really fair to our staff to try to do that, so we're going to try to give them more time. So if it's put in by 12, we should be able to have changes on the floor and bills on the floor by 4. Go ahead, Representative Newberry.
Thank you. So I'm just curious because I understand that argument, and I know they have a tough job down at Ledge Council, but it's always been 3 p.m. during my time here, and it's been 3 p.m. for a long, long time. So did something change? I mean, the same staff, right? Different people maybe, but I just think sometimes, you know, we're all busy. Sometimes there might be a minor change. I know the speaker can waive it, and maybe that'll be a common practice, but a lot of time, 12 noon seems a little early, is my point.
Okay. Again, this, I think, is coming from a lot of what they've been hearing from legal counsel, that it isn't, we've probably over time, I'm not sure how many bills were probably put in earlier, and then now, if there's more bills being put in, and they just don't have the time, it comes, they're asking for it because there's a lot of pressure on them, and they want to do it correctly and properly and not have to pull it out and do sub-A changes. So that's, I believe, what the recommendation, how the recommendation, Representative Kazirian.
Oh, I'll just also add, I think that sometimes when we rush and we do things last minute, I've seen reps come and say that it's wrong, the sub-A that they submitted. So I think by having a noon deadline, it gives them a little bit more time to make sure it's right, and, you know, it makes us look more professional. We're doing things the way, you know, we intend to do them, so.
No, I'm sorry. I appreciate that. I just, you know, at the end of the day, if I have an amendment drafted, say I send it to our legal counsel, they may submit it by noon. The odds I'm going to look at the actual text to see if there's a mistake before 3:30 are pretty slim as a practical matter. So I understand what you're saying, but I'm not usually here on session days until close to 4. So.
Yeah, well, a lot of us aren't. Representative Kazarian.
Just
again.
one other point, I think that there have been a lot of amendments, a lot more like bills every year. So I
Yes.
think the idea is just that since we're getting so many, just have a noon deadline, and that way it's again, adding to the professionalism, the way we're operating.
I think that's what they're trying to do, to make sure there's no mistakes. Are there any other questions regarding this particular item?
No.
No, hearing none, I'll move on to the next item, which is on page 18, Rule 33, C/D, and it corrects the clerk to reflect practice relating to late arrivals and early departures into the chamber. So now we will communicate with Diane DePina. She's going to be the recording clerk. So if you're late, we're just saying that, make sure you point it out to her that you're late and that you're there on the floor, so she can make sure that she has the proper attendance. And if you're leaving early, that she knows, and she can, you know, take care of the button too, that your button's shut off, and that we know that there'll be no voting going on. But that's really just reporting to the recording clerk now, making sure we talk to her. And it is Diane DePina. We voted her in last week. All right, any questions on that?
Nope.
Okay. So next, we are going to move to page 20. Hope I'm not going too fast if you're going to spin to that page. And it's Rule 38A. And this clarifies that persons admitted to the House chamber may not use signals or display signage during a House session. So really, it's about the decorum of the House and making sure that we have political debate on the floor of the House that is limited to debate between the members, and interested parties are limited in disruption, so we don't want any of the signs and that type of thing, or anybody giving signs from up in, you know, the galleries. If they're there, they are there to watch the proceedings and not get involved in the proceedings on the floor. Okay, so I don't know if anybody has any comments on that. Representative Phillips.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Does this include, it says display signage, does this include any other, like, T-shirts or hats, things like that, that may have words on it or figures on it that may be offensive also, and or other things that they bring into the chamber?
I believe it does. They can wear it outside of the chamber.
Right.
If they want to come into the chamber, they should have a coat or a sweater to cover that up. They are certainly welcome to do that outside of the chamber. But again, they cannot become part of the process that's going on in the floor.
Do you think we should be more specific instead of just put display signage to put, or any other item or article that would be deemed offensive?
I think
or
signage kind of covers
I think
it all.
it's, yeah, that's clear to me. I think
I don't know.
signage is
Again,
clear.
let's see what the rest of
Or articles of clothing? Is that
the Representative Corvasi.
articles of
So-
clothing or other?
Yeah.
So to dovetail onto what Representative Phillips is saying, so it would include sayings on shirts, etc. Does that include those individuals in the gallery?
That is, yes, they are part of the chamber, yes.
Okay, so they would have to wear some type of coat or what have you to cover that.
Yes.
Okay,
According
thank
to this rule change, yes. That would be,
Good rule.
Chairwoman,
yes.
just for clarification, it doesn't include colors, because colors means
No.
a lot of things here,
Yeah,
so.
no,
I
colors-
just want to be sure that it's not.
And yes.
Okay, thank you.
Colors you can wear, it's the verbiage, signage, I should say.
Okay.
Signage is what,
To be clear, as he mentioned, we need to be more specific to avoid any confusion. So thank you.
Chairwoman, I have a question.
yes, Representative.
Thank you, Chairwoman. So again, I'm not clear. You're indicating that these T-shirts or articles of clothing
Signage.
with a political message on them or a propensity towards a political idea cannot be worn on the floor
Correct, you would have to cover them.
or in the gallery.
In the gallery, they have to cover them, wear a jacket or a sweater or something
Okay,
like
my concern is, and I like the idea, but my concern is how is that going to be communicated to the many groups who come into the building wearing just those shirts, because it's usually so warm in here, they don't bring in coats or jackets, and they're going to be asked to not sit in the gallery, or they're going to be asked to leave, or I just wonder how it's going to be communicated, or will it?
Well, that is a good point. That's something that we probably have to discuss further on. If we stop putting in the rules, we can let people know that that's, again, this is up to this body to decide, and then the bigger body to decide on how they want to do this. Representative Shanley.
Is the floor considered the gallery, or
It's
is the
the
gallery
chamber,
considered
it's
a
the
part of the
chamber.
floor? Well, this says rules pertaining to admission of the floor, and all the language mentions the floor.
It really should be the House chamber. I think that's what they were looking at, so.
Provision to the floor.
Yeah.
Madam Chair.
It's the floor, it does say the
Yeah,
floor. It
Madam-
does say the
Line
floor, but I think
26.
it is supposed to be the chamber too. But, all right, we'll stick with the floor now. We can talk about this and doing a change if we want to. I mean, it's up to this rules.
If the intent is to include the gallery, then we can change the rules.
Yeah, I was going to say, Madam Chair, putting aside the wisdom one, if we want to include the gallery on this, it should say that, because
Yes,
it's not clear.
yes, it-
Now, whether we should, that's a whole different topic. I'm not sure if.
All right, it's
Now,
something that we can talk about.
One more thought, Chairwoman, if I may. I'm just not sure, because I know bandanas are handy, they're quick,
Okay.
and they're inexpensive. So is this going to include certain bandanas that are worn to express a political
If it has
agenda?
signage on it, if you have just a color bandana, that might be, other people might not understand that. If signage, I think, is the point here.
Okay.
Madam,
Signal, making any type of signals or display signage in any other way to the House members present on the floor of the House. Okay? Oh, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Leader Chippendale, I'm sorry.
That's just fine. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think in the context of the House floor, the rules are the appropriate place to do this. When we're talking about the gallery, First Amendment concerns notwithstanding, of which I believe there are plenty, we could have a veteran up there with a VFW hat on, and we're debating a veterans-related bill, and someone who's opposed to it can view that as advocacy for an issue. I think there's a lot of trappings in when we start to pull the gallery in, and I'm hopeful that this committee, in its deliberations, will consider those and see that perhaps the wisdom is just sticking to the floor and letting people enjoy the First Amendment in the galleries. Thank you.
That's fine. That's fine. We can keep it to the floor, too. If that's what we'd like to do. That's fine? Okay. We'll stick with it that way. Okay. So any other questions on this? Yes, Representative O'Brien?
Now that would, I'd like that idea, but I don't want signs in the gallery. Like, I don't want a big 5x6 sign, all right? So,
All right, so we can talk about that. We can, right now, we have floor, so we're just talking on the floor. I can see where there might be some First Amendment issues, but,
we've never allowed that.
yeah. Well, with the floor, people have done that, but then if they get out of control, not out of control, but, raucous, then I know that the Capitol Police have stepped in.
Correct.
Representative Kazirian.
I'm just looking at it now, I think that this just applies to
floor.
signs on the floor. I don't think
Okay.
this applies to T-shirts in the gallery.
Okay.
So I think that the T-shirts in the gallery thing is would still be allowed under this. I think it's just about like the signs and like signaling on the floor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that we will stick with the floor version on that, okay? Any other questions, any other concerns by anybody else? I think we've come to an agreement on that. Okay, and then I think that we've covered that, except for really the only other changes that we have are just some of the updates on various dates and deadlines for the 2023, 2024. So just reading the February deadlines, which is in our bill, that the deadlines for introduction will be February 16th, 2023, and then next year it will be Thursday, February 15th, 2024. And then the April deadline in which we refer to as our hearing deadlines will be April 11th of 2023 this year, and then Wednesday of April 10th, 2024 of next year. Anybody have any concerns or questions about these changes? No? Hearing none, no other questions regarding this, this resolution, I'm going to go to testimony from the public, and John Marion from Common Cause. You are Con, and please come up and welcome. Hello, John.
There we go. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Happy New Year.
Yes.
Thank you, Chairwoman, members of the committee, for having me. I signed up as Con, even though I'm not necessarily opposed to everything in it. So I'll just explain three things. The first comment regards the time that you have to submit amendments by in the day. I just want to raise 2 points. One is just pointing out you are a part-time legislature. Many of you have day jobs. And the later in the day that deadline is, the more time it affords legislators who have day jobs to submit these amendments. So, understanding the balance there with the ability of the staff to do their work, but it would seem that particularly for legislators who do have day jobs, having that later deadline would be helpful. The other point is more a kind of a political power thing. I think we've all seen that, when there are amendments that leadership is opposed to, they prepare counter arguments for the floor debate. And this would give the leadership more time to do that. I just think that should be brought up because I think, that the public should sort of understand how the dynamic works, and that moving this deadline will shift that dynamic by giving more time to do that. My second comment is about on page 10, the language deleting the 2-year system for bills. I would echo both Representative Newberry and Representative Kennedy's comments. I think this was well intended when it was introduced, but in practice it really didn't work. It's much like the fact that the Senate has conference committees in its rules, but you don't, and therefore we don't have conference committees. It really sort of, a rule like that to work would really take the cooperation of the Senate to make it work. But I think it was Representative Knight's original idea several years ago, and I think it was a good effort to try to do that. The final comment is about what you were just debating about signals and signs and so forth. Yeah, my reading is that it's confined just to the floor, which was why I wasn't going to testify about it. If it were, about the gallery, we would oppose including the gallery there. I assume the fact that you don't see Steve Brown here is probably because he read it. I can't speak for him. I haven't talked to him about it, but I assume he read it as also not including the gallery, because there would be, serious concerns about the First Amendment right of people. Now, I do think there is a rule that is enforced about signs in the gallery. I sit in the gallery. The Capitol Police come around and tell us what we can and can't do up there, and it's policed. And I don't believe they allow signs, but they certainly allow, people to display in T-shirts and hats and all other manner their support or opposition for various issues and bills.
Okay. I think we're in agreement on that. Are there
Thank
any
you.
questions for Mr. Marion? No? Hearing none?
Thank you.
No, thank you. Well, that's the only person we had testifying on House Bill 5051. Oh, you did? Yes, you did. She did stick it up. I'm sorry, I moved it over. Steve Alquist, please come forward.
Sorry, I'll be quick. I just
Okay, welcome.
heard some of this.
There you go.
I was hearing some of the, am I on?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I was hearing some of the debate about the T-shirts and stuff in the gallery, and it worried me as well, so I asked to be included in this because I think there's absolutely First Amendment concerns here. I also think there's a limit to how you can tell people not to signal, right? And we know this because there's color coding to a lot of the issues that go on here, right? We see the yellow shirts in support of guns. We see green shirts and pink shirts in support of abortion or environmental rights or whatever. And so if we're going to start getting into that level of signaling, we're going to be in a lot of trouble even on the floor. And I think even legislators here sometimes wear colors and ribbons and other signs on the floor signaling their support or opposition to different causes. And I think other people will be doing that too. And if we're going to be policing it to that extent, to signaling is a really fine, granular thing. And it's important that we don't get too far into this. I think decorum can be preserved without having to come up with onerous rules about what can and cannot be worn on the floor. I think about a baseball team coming in, and maybe they have something on the back that says Adler's, or they have something from a company that might have some legislation before this body. And are they advocating now, or are they just a little league baseball team who just happen to win, and you want to honor them? Are you going to tell them they have to take off their shirts? Veterans was a really good point. What about police officers? When they come in full uniform and we're debating issues of police, and police have with them a certain amount of cultural cachet, their very presence could be thought of as a signal to determine or shape legislation in some ways. So we have to really think about how far we want to go here, and I would caution against doing anything too onerous, and I would even want to pull back and maybe not do this about signs and T-shirts on the floor. I think it's probably a slippery slope and a bad idea. And I will I'll emphasize what John Marion just said about signs in the gallery. The Capitol Police do in fact limit those. They have piles of them into the doors outside the gallery, behind chairs and such, because they're told not to leave them there. My understanding is a safety issue, because they don't want people being disgruntled, just throwing them down and hitting the speaker or hitting anybody in the gallery, or on the floor. So that's my opinion, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alquist. Are there any questions for Mr. Alquist? Oh, yes, Representative Phillips.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Alquist, my initial response for that was due to, I've seen in the past T-shirts with offensive graphics on it, let's say, and not that the color. The color doesn't matter. I know we have red, pink, green, yellow, whatever other colors. That's not the point that I was bringing up. I'm thinking people that are in the gallery that have offensive items that are screen printed onto their T-shirts or onto the hats or whatever. That's my only concern, is people that the normal person would say it's offensive to them.
Yeah, and I think that's hard too, because, you know, these issues that we're talking about, some of them are offensive to a lot of people. A pro-abortion shirt would be offensive to many people, and I would see that. A pro-gun, very violent leaning shirt might be offensive to people too. So offense is a really difficult thing, and I mean the Supreme Court on the state and federal level negotiate this all the time. We really might want to think about erring on the side of being offended slightly than not erring on the side of stepping on people's rights to express themselves.
Okay,
Madam Chair,
Zerpa.
after listening to Steve, I'm trying to extrapolate this to the nth degree. What could be. And Steve, you made a good point. I'm thinking about the activists who come in. Autism Speaks, or it's Breast Cancer Month, and we wear pins or ribbon. I mean, who doesn't support autistic students? Who doesn't support breast cancer research? And I can't imagine that anyone would be offended by that. But then by the same token, I'm trying to think of some other month. I don't know, let me pick something out. Somebody may be offended by Gay Pride Month and wear a multicolored ribbon or T-shirt. So, just trying to think this through. I don't know, this is a tough road to go down. The t-shirts are big, they're obvious, they're easy, but then you get into the minutia of pins and, I don't know. Just,
Representative Kazarian?
I just want to clarify, maybe council can clarify too, because I understand all the points that we're making, but I think it's only pertaining to signs. I don't think it's about t-shirts or,
Colors.
or colors. I think it's just like having signs on the floor about issues. Am I correct in my reading of that, or?
It is. We have, notwithstanding any First Amendment right, being on the floor is a privilege. It's not for the same thing. Like you said, if they're going to protest in the gallery, as the representative said, that's the proper place for them to be displaying that kind of material. It's not on the House floor. You're being invited on the House floor. So by being accepting that invitation, you're abiding by the rules chosen, right? You accept as a legislature that you have to be dressed appropriately to be on the House floor. We would expect also that the visitors to the House floor would abide by similar rules.
So just to clarify too, the point that Mr. Alquist just made about if a baseball team came in and they were wearing a jersey that had like a company symbol on them, I don't think this would pertain to that. Am I correct in my reading of it?
I can see his point, but I would agree with you, yes. It's not what the intended, it's not what's intended. This is about decorum on the House floor.
And it's about just holding signs that are politically charged.
Yes.
Correct? Okay.
Also, the t-shirts would not be, because we were talking about t-shirts and hats here.
I think we were all getting a little confused, but upon closer reading, and that's why I'm asking, because I want to make sure I'm reading it right. I don't think it pertains to clothing. I think it's only if you had a politically charged sign.
But it could be for clothing, because
Clothing that has politically
dressed on the House floor.
So let's get it clear now. It's floor only. It's signage.
Okay.
I don't think that, if it's still going to be, the guns, people are going to come in, I still think that yellow ties would probably be worn by some of the people. And I think, if there's the EAC bill comes on the floor, whatever color, it's either green or pink, might be used. But as long as there's not anything written anywhere on a person on the floor, that is what we're talking about here, to keep the decorum of the floor. My apologies for saying chamber before. Floor. It's floor. Okay, Leader.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree. And signage in the sense, the wacky inflatable arm flailing tube man is signage, right? So it's not just signs per se. A T-shirt that I put on a stick is a sign. So I think it is based on decorum, and we don't enjoy those First Amendment protections on the floor as members, because our speech is stifled by our rules all the time. We're only allowed so many minutes, so many times to rise. So it's not out of the ordinary to expect members to rise to a certain level of decorum. So I think we are very different from the public in this sense, and I think this is appropriate the way it is. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Very good point.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Any other questions for Steve?
Yes, Chairwoman, just for...
Thank you all said. Thank you, Steve.
Just for clarification, when we're talking about signage, the size matter? Because sometimes as a legislator we receive a, sorry, Kazirian, we receive, they distracted me, Chairwoman. You see, decorum, please. What was the joke? Excuse me, Chairwoman. Sometime as a legislator in middle of campaign, members receive a information that could be considering. So are we restricted to receive it, or will be some rule in the floor to avoid those situations? Because, if, for example, we receiving during the Child Care Day, we may receive a pinwheel signify that they supporting the bill or legislators supporting those type of material that you display at your desk.
If it's on your desk, flat on your desk, and you're not wearing it as signage and holding it up for the television.
Okay, I just a clarification because.
I wouldn't have posters at my desk if you're saying somebody's coming in with some literature about that particular thing, that's fine. If you're holding it up, you're hanging on the back of your chair, if you're not in your seat, that type of thing. I remember that, I think this came from, T-shirts being thrown over the back of seats, that type of thing. So that's the kind of signage we're talking about. If it's a pamphlet being handed out and it's flat on your desk, you're not really promoting it and you're not holding it up as signage, That's, because we get a lot of things sent to us and put on our desk. So, we will learn as we go along with this rule if it passes, okay? I think we're all set with that. Any other questions? Then, if not, then I will close the hearing on House Bill 5051, and we will move right down the line to 5052, and this is by my second vice chair, Representative Zerpa, and this is a resolution amending the rules of the House regarding matters that may be debated or spoken on the House floor. And I will give the floor to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm introducing this amendment because I've noticed during the past couple of years, and I know that my colleagues have noticed, that under announcements and requests, there have been far too many requests for and granting of permission to read from personal journals, to read from poems, to read prose, to read from personal diaries. And as Mr. Marion so astutely points out, we are a part-time legislature. Many of my colleagues don't have the luxury of being retired. Their time is valuable, and even though I am retired, my time is valuable too. And frankly, I resent having to sit there and listen to sometimes 10 minutes of a reading that has nothing to do with a piece of legislation at hand. It might have something to do with something somebody knew that had something to do with this legislation. But again, it's a roundabout way of, frankly, usurping time, and I would not like those personal memoirs and soliloquies and opinions being allowed to be read on the floor. They have no place. If you want to have a little meeting in a room somewhere, ask for a room and do your reading to the interested parties. But I think that the rest of us, frankly, don't have time for it.
Okay.
There goes my autobiography.
Oh, that's what. Excuse me. I will take Representative Newberry because I saw his hand
I
first.
think this is an outstanding piece of legislation.
You like this?
I would like to add my name as a co-sponsor.
Absolutely.
And I would encourage the chair to maybe we can the moving for held for further study and just add this right into the rules now. But I'd be happy with a sub-A version that contained it.
Whatever you wanted to, Representative Newberry. I knew you'd like it.
Representative Kennedy.
So, since I've been in the building since the building was constructed.
Yes. You laid the cornerstone.
The fact of the matter is, years ago, we had a legislator from Woonsocket, Rainey Lafayette, and Rainey Lafayette came up with what was known as the Lafayette Minutes. And it was actually one day during the session week in which legislators could actually stay after the session and then speak on whatever they wanted to speak about, which includes reading a poem or speaking about whatever subject matter, and they were limited to a certain amount of time, but that was in the House rules for a substantial period of time back in the 90s, and then was eventually removed because of the fact that people were not utilizing it. But as Chairwoman Zerpa has pointed out, our days are becoming longer, and when we're stuck on the floor because of these things being included into the floor session day, it really does delay the start of committees and committee hearings. So I do support this particular change, but we might want to consider going back to what used to exist back in the 90s, which was that ability to set aside one day in which individual members could speak on whatever they wanted to.
Do you mean after session? Like as the resolutions are read by the clerk and people who want to stay and listen? I could live with that.
That's not a bad idea. Representative McNamara.
Yes, just to follow up on Representative Kennedy's Rule 56, as someone that abused that rule when it was in session, and what happens is, and the reason we don't have it now is because individuals like myself, when I was a young rep, if I had a good speech that I'd used anywhere, I would call a Rule 56, regardless of what it was about, and at the end of session, go on. And then as the years went on, other people who had a similar thought on a piece of legislation that maybe we had not considered, I would have them join me. So it was almost like this after session. So it did become a rule that was abused, and somewhere along the line, the Rule 56, when we mentioned bringing it up, it's just ripe for abuse, just like any other rule where people will extend it. And I think there's enough, we have enough opportunities as legislators under these rules to express ourselves in a meaningful way. So for those reasons, even though it added a little bit of color to our session years ago, I would recommend we don't go down that path. Thank you.
Are there any other thoughts on Representative Zerpa's bill? Now, I just have to ask, what does this do to your poem on St. Patrick's Day?
Well, the St. Patrick's Day, it is
You
on.
included all of us last year.
It is, yes, well, of course.
I'd like to see it again.
We're all inclusive, St. Patrick's Day poem, but it is part of the agenda for the day, and it's the equivalent of, it's germane to the celebration, and most of the time I try to make it relevant, but.
And of course, with the consent of the majority and minority leaders, we can just waive it for that day because no one wants to miss the poem.
Well, the only other concern I have with this, and I understand, I did like the poems, I did like the poetry. It's a little different for the floor. But if there's some type of thing like would happen with Ukraine or with 9/11 and some event comes up, are we able to continue to, express, if there's something emotional that happens, will we be able to do that? I just want to make sure that we are not cutting ourselves off at the knees here. I'm just being an advocate.
That's a valid point. Remember, the speaker has to enforce this, and the speaker's only going to enforce it if people in the room object. So I think if the room is okay with it, it'll be allowed. If the room objects to it but doesn't want to be the one to object, it gives the speaker the tool to act without. That's how I read this.
Okay, I just wanted to ask, get that out there on the floor. All right, any other, and I don't see anybody here to testify, but I've lost that pile of paper.
That's because everybody likes it.
Okay. Okay, Pat, you're probably correct. All right, then I will close the hearing on House Bill 5052, and next we will move to House Bill 5053 by Representative Bella Wilkinson, and this requires a bill impacting Veterans Affairs as well as other subject matters, only to be referred to the Committee on Veterans Affairs after all of the committee hearings are conducted. Representative Bella Wilkinson is coming to the mic. Welcome. Welcome, Camille. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, it's on. So the reason that I put this bill in is because of feedback that I've been getting from veterans. I've been getting this type of feedback over the last several years. What will happen is a lot of the vets or military families will look under the committee agenda to see if there's a bill that's coming in that's going to affect them in their community. And that's not always the case. We're only in the third week of this session, and there are 4 bills that have been set aside to affect veterans, and only half of them are scheduled for the Veterans Committee. The other 2, one is, I believe, finance, and the last one is special legislation. I was told the reason that we do it this way, where we can just peel off the veterans' bills and send it to other committees first, was to expedite the discussion on various bills. And I have to tell you, I think that that's a poor excuse to cut bills out of a committee. I mean, the reason that we have a committee made up of members of the House for veterans is because these are individuals who are either veterans or their military family members, or they have a particular interest because of constituents or whatever the reason happens to be. But to say that we're going to take some of the bills and just scatter it to the four winds, to me, it doesn't make any sense. When we had the abortion bill went to judiciary because it affected a law. It didn't go to health and education. But it didn't seem to be a problem because so much of the general public was following it. They knew instinctively to go to the agenda listing under judiciary. If our concern is to expeditiously process legislation so that the session doesn't go on too long, then we may want to consider adopting a rule, like I believe the Senate has, that limits the total number of bills that any one member of the House would be able to submit in a year. So, or in a session, I should say. And then you don't have to worry about whether or not it's going to go long. Each member would have to police his or herself and decide, okay, I've got 25 issues, instead of I'm going to dump 75 issues into the hopper and not worry about how long the session's going to be. So you have to really ask yourself, what is it that we're here for? If the answer to dealing with the veterans' issues is to farm those bills out, then I feel what we're saying is that we're not as interested in the feedback of the organization, the people that these bills are going to be impacting mostly. And I've heard from members of the DAV, I've heard from members of the American Legion, all different types of organizations. So I would ask you to seriously consider, if it doesn't work out and we're finding that it's become too burdensome, it can always be repealed. But I would seriously hope that this body would consider how important veterans' issues are, not only to the veterans and their families, but to all of you. And let's walk the talk.
Okay. Thank you, Representative. Are there any questions for the representative? Representative Zerpa.
Thank you, Chairwoman. So, Representative Wilkinson, we certainly all have respect for veterans, and I come from a large family of veterans. I just want to understand your amendment. So, for instance, as long as I've been here, any bill with a fiscal impact goes to finance. That's the way I've been trained. So, am I to understand that if a bill comes along and it has a fiscal impact, it would still go to finance, because on line 6 it said it shall be veterans bills shall be referred to the Committee on Veterans Affairs only after all other committee hearings are conducted or concluded. So after fiscal, here's the bill, and legal counsel makes, and the fiscal staff makes note of the recommendation. So then it goes to another hearing in Veterans Affairs.
Yes, thank you for the question, Representative. It would give an opportunity for the chair of Finance to provide any additional insight from a fiscal point of view to the chair of Veterans, so that when the committee is hearing it, then Chairman Azanaro would be able to say, I had the opportunity to speak to the chair of Finance, and this is what the impact would be, so that we would have all of that information. But to just cut veterans out, I don't think is effective, quite frankly. I mean, there's been some bills dealing with our favorite subject, which is the specialty license plates. And a decision had been considered just putting a paper decal and not striking additional plates if they had members of Disabled American Veterans or Veterans of Foreign Wars, and having a full metal plate. The veterans community didn't like that. They didn't want a paper label, which could be washed off after months of New England weather or going through the car wash, or just peeled off if someone decided that they wanted to take it. And we never had an opportunity to even weigh in on it. Now, you could say, well, if any one of the veterans in the House wants to be heard, they can go in. But I could tell you that even though I've been here for 3 terms, there have been times when I've missed a bill that was set up for veterans and military families because I wasn't looking for it in another committee. You know, I didn't always go through every agenda of every committee each week. And sometimes my admin missed it as well because there wasn't the expectation. The expectation was if it's a bill dealing with veterans, it's going to go to the Veterans Committee.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative O'Brien had a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a statement that on finance, we do have a subcommittee for on veterans, veteran affairs, right? I mean, I believe you're on it?
General government.
General government. Okay, thank you.
Representative Newberry.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to preface my comment by saying that because these are the House rules as opposed to any other legislation, courts don't get involved in interpretations. At the end of the day, we kind of do what we collectively want to do. And I don't mean that in a nefarious way. It's the reality. We enforce our own rules. The court's not going to get involved. I understand what you're trying to do, but I just think it's unworkable in practice. And you know, the way it works now, the Speaker's legal counsel is who assigns bills to committees. It's always been that way. Someone has to make those decisions, and sometimes it's going to be discretionary. And I think in all the times I've been here with, I don't know, 5 or 6 different Speakers, legal counsels, they've all, in my experience, tried to do it in an apolitical way, you know, try to balance things out and do the right thing. Not to anger our colleagues on the other side of the building, we've seen some shenanigans with committees being moved around over there, but it hasn't happened in my experience here. And I think we have to, at some level, trust that that's the way things are going to be done here. The problem with the bill is that it's mandatory. Every bill, I know some things are obviously veterans bills, but every bill impacts veterans affairs. For example, I had a town bill for North Smithfield a couple of years ago, exemption property taxes for veterans, and it went to municipal government. Obviously, the bill impacts veterans, but in a practical way, it impacts the residents in North Smithfield who are not veterans, much more so. So it really didn't belong in the Veterans Committee, in my view. I wouldn't have cared personally which one it went to, but it really didn't belong in the Veterans Committee. But someone has to make that decision. By making this mandatory, it could really gum up the works at the end of session. So I know what you're trying to do, but that's my practical concern with it.
Thank you for the comment, Representative. Would it make more sense if instead of saying it shall be, if it was changed to whenever practicable? I mean, I'm not going to be hard around the edges with this, but I could tell you that when you've got a fully membered committee who's ready, able, and anxious to work on veterans issues, and I think last session we had, last year, I think we only met twice or possibly 3 times. And, you know, it's frustrating. It's also frustrating, again, when you're speaking to veterans and they say, you know, you guys don't do anything for veterans. You're a paper dog. The committee isn't worthwhile.
I would just recommend, if you want to do something like that, maybe at the request of the chair of the Veterans Committee, and trust the chair of the Veterans Committee to use their discretion. That's one suggestion.
I would not have a problem with that language changed if that's what this committee decides is best to serve the issue.
Okay, thank you. Leader Chippendale.
Thank you, Chair. I agree, and I think that if we were to empower the Veterans Chairman to initiate that, that would be appropriate. One thing I think is worth clarifying, though, is this doesn't really address whether or not the bill's passed. So by the verbiage of this rule, it would be any bill that's heard would then go to. So perhaps it could be tweaked just a little bit to indicate only those bills that pass would then be referred. Because why would you review a bill that's inconsequential? It's not going to pass.
And see, that really is the crux of the problem. What if it's inconsequential to the committee that heard it initially, but it's not inconsequential to the Veterans Committee or to the veterans that want to come and speak on the bill?
Sure, and I think that having the chairman of vets empowered to initiate that addresses that, where he feels or she may feel this is an issue that is worthy of the Veterans Committee. Whether or not it passes is irrelevant. I'm thinking this through as we're reviewing this rule. I don't necessarily disagree with the intent of where you're going, but the practical aspects of it that were already talked about probably have to be fleshed out a little bit more if it's to be pursued. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
And Sam Azanaro, Representative Azanaro.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I've been chair for 5 or 6 years now, I guess. But the way it always was done was any veteran bill came to Veterans Affairs, and it was held for further study. And then there was an impact, a financial impact on the bill. So it went from Veterans Affairs Committee to the Finance Committee. And to get a fiscal note to see what the particular bill was going to I think that's the only other committee it would have to go to, a veterans bill. I don't know of any other bill committee. So it's kind of I think leadership thought it was kind of a waste of time to, if they knew there was going to be a fiscal note on it, send it to finance first, which is probably, this is what we're doing. But I agree, after that, if there is, it can come back to Veterans Affairs Committee, say, look, this is the fiscal note that we got, this is what Marvin Abney, the chair of finance, says it's going to cost to do this. Then we can hear it. I have no problem with hearing the bill after a fiscal note has been done. But it seems like the leadership just reversed things because it was a waste of time to go through my chair and be held for further study and then have to go to finance for the fiscal note. And then where it went from there, you don't know what happens to it. So I would have no problem with it going to, if there's a fiscal note going to be on a bill, go to finance and then come back to us to be heard. This is what it's going to cost for the bill, and we can make a decision on that. But if they don't, if they are totally, as the leader Chippendale said, against this, then you're going to be fighting one committee against the other, I think. So there could be an issue with that.
If it was only bills that were circumvented to finance, that would be one thing. But these are bills that are going to other committees outside of finance as well. Some of them have gone to education. There were 2 years ago, there were three bills that came to us from the federal VA that dealt with educational benefits. And so they went, all three of them went to, 2 out of 3 went to education. The third one went to finance. We didn't see any of the 3 of them in veterans. And I know because I was the point of contact with the person from the feds that was ushering it through the various New England states. So it's not just things with the fiscal impact. I get the fact I'm on finance, and as the first Vice Chair O'Brien had said, we do hear veterans issues in general government, which is a subcommittee of finance. So we do that, but I'm talking much broader than only a fiscal note. Okay. Again, you have people in the community that want the opportunity to be able to speak. They don't know about the bills until after the committee has met. And I guess you're not getting any calls. I'm very involved in as you well know, I'm very involved in a number of organizations. And the members will say to me, how come you're not letting us know? I don't always know. I don't always know, and I'm physically here.
I think that's something that really needs to be discussed to get the word out that a particular bill which concerns veterans is going to education, for instance, or it's going to finance, so that people, the veterans commission, like you're involved with, the VFW, the American Legion, whatever, can be notified. And if it has to go through the Veterans Affairs Office, I would be happy to do that, to say, listen, these bills are going to be heard in another committee tonight. If you're interested, go to the committee meeting, wherever it might be.
Well, unfortunately, the Office of Veterans Affairs, which is an executive entity, doesn't do any kind of communication like that with the general public. And they don't normally speak to even members of the Veterans Committee unless they're going to be in the House for a specific reason. So
Are you talking
the Office of Veterans Affairs, I'm talking about.
my office or the state's office?
No, your House Veterans Affairs and Military Families. The Office of Veterans Affairs, the State Office of Veterans Affairs, they don't express any information regarding veterans' bills. So they don't do that. They're not involved in that.
All right. But we can.
We can.
Yep.
If you, I mean, you're the chair. If you want the clerk to do that, that's up to you. From my point of view, I would just like to see that if there's veterans' bills, that we're going to get more than 2 in a year. Otherwise, honestly, what's the point of having a fully manned or womaned organization just for veterans and military families? But if we need to change the language, again, I don't have a problem with that. I just want to make sure that the Veterans Committee, which understands the issues a little bit more, has the opportunity to be heard and to vet some of these issues. One bill that was an issue that came before Judiciary last year was brought up by the director, and he was looking at changing the requirement for the director of the veterans home to no longer be a military veteran. He wanted it to be a civilian, and he came before Judiciary. And, he was just explaining that it was very difficult to find a veteran, in his estimation, that had the criteria in order to be the head of the veterans home. And I'm a member of Judiciary, and I argued the point with him. And I will tell you that Representative Knight served in the military, but he's not as involved in the veterans community, and I don't know what, if any, work he's done with the home. He didn't understand himself, and he admitted it on, so I don't feel like I'm, talking out of school, but he said himself he didn't understand what the problem was, as long as we had someone that had the criteria. It's a highly paid position set aside for a veteran, and you need to understand things like that, what that means to the veterans community in order to fight for it. Instead of just saying, well, it's a job like any other job, what difference does it make? It doesn't have to be a veteran. Yeah, you need, sometimes when you've got a building full of veterans and they get cantankerous, they need somebody who's a veteran that could talk to them right on and without mincing any words. And especially if it's someone who's a senior officer. These men and women are going to respond to that. And there's many times when the director of the home had to step in and pull rank. Can't pull rank if you didn't have any. Okay? So.
All right, I understand that we're getting
Yeah,
off,
I don't
off
want
of the,
to
we're getting off of that
belabor
subject,
this,
but just for clarification, the director of Veterans Affairs in the state has put out feelers and requests for proposal for people to come forward, and cannot find, this is what I'm told, cannot find a veteran who is qualified to run a nursing home or a home. And that's been the issue. So I want to end it there. I don't, I've asked, are you still looking for help? Are you still, yes, we are, yes, we are, yes, we are. And that bill might come back again to have it where we're looking for someone that has the ability to run a nursing home. Okay. And there's not a veteran that's come forward so far. So that's that. But let me, just one other point about the license plate, because I was in favor of the decal, and I'll tell you for one reason. I wanted to find out, it would be very cheap, but cost nothing for these decals to be put on a plate, and we would find out how many plates would have to be made. And if we don't come up with I think the number is 600, then they're not going to make the plate. But if we just say, if anyone has the, it wasn't the Purple Heart, it was the Bronze Star metal plate. We could get an idea by doing that. And I talked to Bud Craddock about it. He said, yeah, we'd give them a sticker. If that comes up, they need 600 or 700, 800, we'll make the plate. That's the only reason I was in favor of that. I'm not against doing the plate, but I wanted to see if it was going to be a waste of time looking for 600 people for the plate. But anyway, that's it.
Yeah, we're getting kind of off track
Yeah,
on that,
off the
but getting back to the bill. Is there anybody else who has any questions? My only concern is that Representative Carson and Cortefran had also come forward with kind of a bill idea like this, and because they sit on environment, and a lot of bills go to finance and don't come to the environment, and they're like, no offense to anybody on finance, but they might not be as involved in an environmental bill.
Sure.
And it wasn't coming to the environment. So the same thing, and what would happen is, I think it could get a little confusing because the veterans are certainly very, very important, and the environment's very important. But then who really has to have charge of it? So, in talking with Nicole, she was trying to kind of dictate on, what bills could go. Maybe not all of them need to go to finance. Some could go to, more into the environment. Same thing with yours. I mean, if Sam wants to go up and say, she has some of the bills, maybe we can direct them more towards what you want to do versus, all the committees would come up and say, well, it's going to finance and it's not coming to my committee. We could have a big issue, with, the hearing of the bill and who's responsible for the bill. So that's where it might get a little bit confusing. If we do it for one, then, again, it was almost going to be the exact same bill as yours. So there is, concern. So it's really just kind of maybe talking to Sam on where they want to go and really talking to Sharon too, does this really need to go to finance? And maybe it can come to veterans, same with some of the environmental bills or any of the other bills that are being heard out there. Because it just sometimes gets a little too cumbersome. I can see you're very passionate. We all know you're very passionate. We know Sam's very passionate on the veterans bills. And we want to make sure they go to the right committees. But, finance, if there's a big ticket item to it, a big number to it, it's got to go through finance. And, we all know that. Yes?
Madam Chair, just one last point. If my clerk would have no problem sending out an email to the Veterans Associations across them saying there's going to be a bill heard in finance on such and such a date. If you would like to attend, there you go.
All right.
So at least they'd be aware of a meeting in another committee.
That's fine.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Representative Villa Wilkinson? Hearing none. Thank you so much for your testimony. We appreciate that. And we're going to close the hearing on 5053. And next, we're going to move on to House Bill 5054 is Representative Breen here? Yes, he is, way in the back. And I see you, Representative Constantino, you're up on deck. You're in the batter's box. And so Representative Breen's bill is amend Section 45D of the House Rules regarding caucus organized around a political party affiliation and membership thereto. So Representative Breen, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. If I may offer very quickly, I would just like to say when I was originally a freshman in 2007, I sat in the back of the room, and very often at the end of the sessions, I would see this guy from Warwick I really didn't know come to the back of the room, talk to a camera when they used to have it on the elevated camera in the back of the room with nobody else in the chamber. And I couldn't, and I actually had to ask someone, what is this guy doing and who is he talking to? And that's when I learned about the Lafayette Minute. And so it was Chairman McNamara availed himself of that quite often. And I think he might have been the only one in the chamber at the time back then. I believe you. It's not hard to believe. Madam Chair and members of the committee, I brought this amendment to you today because, quite frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if you read the rules, you skimmed over the section, because it has absolutely nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with anyone in this room. It has nothing to do with anyone in our chamber or even in the Senate chamber. This bill, this rule applies to only one person, that would be me in the chamber, and that is having been elected as an independent. And the one thing that concerns me is that the rule states that I can choose to join a caucus, whether it be the Republican caucus or the Democrat caucus, but only before written communication of that intent is given to the House and then presumably read on the floor by the clerk. And then the Speaker or the Minority Leader makes the judgment of whether or not I would be allowed to join that caucus, and then a denial would be given to the clerk, and that would be presumably read on the House floor as well. I find that problematic only because that rule, one, only applies to one person in the chamber. Two, the speaker or the minority leader ultimately makes the decision. And three, what you have now is a situation where there may be members of a caucus that choose not to caucus with their party. I was speaking with Representative Newberry, who was telling me in 2005 there was a split in the Republican caucus where a number of Republicans chose not to caucus with their own party. There was no notice requirement that they weren't caucusing with their own party. I think it's fair to assume, and for what I understand, the political reality is that there were some members, when we took a speaker's vote on Inauguration Day, who abstained. I don't think their intent is to caucus with the Democrat Party. They don't have to give notice that they're not caucusing with that party. No communication is provided, nothing is read on the House floor. So I think ultimately what this does is this singles out someone like me, and if we're changing the rules for this session, I will be a representative for at least the next 2 years, and this is a specific provision that is really aimed only at someone who was elected as an independent. Now, there might be others that come after me. That may be the case. There probably will be, and that's fine. But right now, I think it places a burden on someone to say, I'm letting the leader of that caucus know, but that's not good enough. It has to be in written form, communicated to the House, put in the journal, and then presumably will be utilized as a written record at some point in the future. I think that it really discourages people from being independent, because you may choose to caucus with a party for any number of reasons. It could be for informational purposes. It could be, there could be any kind of reason. But to be held to a standard in which there is a formalized step that only you being me, would have to comply with, I just don't think I just don't think that kind of step is necessary, because ultimately, like I said, the speaker or the minority leader will make that decision anyway. So it just ends up being more for someone like me. And for that reason, I think amending this rule is not a big lift. I just think it basically comes down to, should I choose to caucus with a party? Leader Chippendale, Speaker Sakachi would say yes or no, and that would be it, and then we'd move on. So I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here. I just think that when I read this, and when I spoke to Speaker Sakachi about it at one point, I said, "Did you know this was in here?" He said, "Absolutely not, but why would I?" And it's a good point. I don't think anyone would know that was in there. But because it applies to me, I wanted to bring it to the Rules Committee.
I see a question from Representative Newberry.
It's not so much it's not so much a question, it's actually irrelevant at this point. It's just an observation. The last independent to get elected to this body was former Minority Leader Phillips.
Yes.
And when he was elected, he, from day one, essentially caucused with the Republicans. And I didn't know the rule was in there. No one followed this rule. No one questioned it. If the decision to allow him to caucus with us at the time was mine, obviously I would defer to the rest of the caucus's opinions. It wasn't an issue. We had him in there. I just don't think this rule has any place. And the fact that the last historical example I can think of, it wasn't enforced and no one cared, tells you it's not really important. I think as a matter of just form, we should get rid of it. So I agree with you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Any other comments? No? Hearing none. I don't know if we have anybody else on this particular bill. No, I don't think so. Then I will close the hearing. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Committee.
I'll close the hearing on 5054, Representative Constantino, 5131, and Representative Tanzi, we'll have you in the batter's box there, because the rest are going to be of our people who are on the panel here, so we don't want to hold you up. So Representative Constantino's bill is going to be looking at amending the House rules to permit a member to vote by proxy when the member is unable to be physically present due to a health condition. Welcome, Representative Costantino.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. On a personal note, last year, as most of you know, I, in February, had to have surgery, and I was out of this building for a couple of weeks. And then May of last year, I had to have emergency surgery. In June, I had to have another emergency surgery. So I was basically absent for most of May and pretty much all of June, which my constituents, the 15,000 people that I represent, had no representation here at the State House. A couple of years we had COVID, and we were allowed to vote by proxy. So I'm just asking this committee, if someone has a medical condition, and I'm not talking about a common cold, I'm talking about if somebody's out due to an accident, if they have a health issue that they're undergoing, any type of surgery, that a doctor's letter be presented to the speaker, and then he would make the decision whether or not we would be able to vote by proxy. And it's pretty much, like I said, the people that I represent in Smithfield, Lincoln, and Johnston had no representation in this building because I wasn't able to get here. And as most of you know, in 2020, I didn't want to miss a budget vote, and I came to the building, and I actually laid on the floor in the back because I wasn't able to sit in a chair during that time. I wanted to vote for the budget. It was important for me, important for my constituents. So I'm just asking that we at least think about it and hopefully give it some consideration. Thank you, and if you have any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Representative Zerpa.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Representative Costantino, thank you. I don't think that this is an unfair request, and I know you're thinking in terms of an extended period of sick leave, basically. Did you have a specific number of days in mind that you think is reasonable, 5, 10?
Well, I would think anything other than 5 days, up, beyond 5 days. And, if it's for, as I said, surgery, God forbid someone's in an accident, they can't get to the building, an extended period of time with a letter from a physician, that's what I'm hoping for.
Like a more than 5 days?
Yeah, more than 5 days.
Okay. Representative Corvasi has a question.
Yeah, Representative Costantino, I certainly agree with the intent of this. I think when we're talking about substantive medical conditions, I would agree that with a physician's letter documenting the problem, I think that something could probably be worked out. I think we may have to, would you be adverse to us trying to flesh out the details of a length of time, et cetera? And also, the submission of a physician's letter, but after a particular period of time is over, another physician's letter may have to be submitted so that this wouldn't be abused. I think that's probably the thing that most people would be concerned about is an abuse. And I know that is not your intent.
Yeah, that is certainly not my intent, and I would be open to having a discussion.
I think that something around this nature, around this issue, should be fleshed out. But you would be, we could work with you and talk to you about this.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions? No? Okay, well then, that will close the hearing.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you, Representative Costantino, on 5131. And next, we will have up Representative Tanzi, and this is House Bill 5137. And Representative Tanzi has a resolution that would amend the House rules to enable any member to have up to 3 bills during second year of a legislative session held for further study, either substituted in committee or a committee vote for potential placement on the floor calendar. And Representative Tanzi is here. Welcome, Representative Tanzi.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. As the chair just stated, this bill is intended to do two things, and I'll go over those quickly. As normal, we introduce a bill. The bill is in a committee. It's held for further study. It is then heard. And then the change would come because each member of the chamber would be allowed to choose 3 bills to be sub-aid without the committee chair approval. So this is just, allowing us to show the public that we're making progress on the work that we're doing and actually holding bills for further study. So we come back with something that's been reworked. We've already heard the committee testimony. We've read what's come in both before and after, had a moment to reflect on it. And then when we have our own sub-A, we're able to submit it to Leg Council. And then a second hearing for that bill would then be held. So each member would have the opportunity to do that 3 times per session. And the second thing is, the same thing, introduce, the bill is held in committee, the bill is heard, and then, the hearing ends. And at some point later, maybe we've determined the bill doesn't need to be sub-aid, or the sponsor determines that it doesn't need to be sub-aid, and they would like to put it to the committee for a vote. So we would have the opportunity to do so for 3 bills. Now, the way our current rules are written, it says that shall be placed on the House calendar after passing through the committee. The difference in this rule change would be that those 3 particular bills would not necessarily be put on the floor calendar. That would be at the discretion of both the chair and leadership. So I think the necessity for this bill is, I know we all just came off the trail for campaigning and a very long process of naming a Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. And we've all heard criticism of things not moving, and in particular in our chamber being held for further study. Many people are yearning for movement on bills that have been heard year after year, and I tried to craft this to constrain the process so that it is small but a significant step to help free what many consider to be a legislative log jam. So having this, one of the constraints, other than just limiting it to 3, is that this would only be done in year 2 of a session. This would have allowed our committees time to organize, to have the membership placed on them. As you know, we're now at the end of January and we haven't even had our committees other than this be established. So year 1, we have the slow start. And by year 2, we come in, we're already on our committees, we already have our assignments, and chances are in year 1, we've already heard the bill. More than likely. So, this would only be something that could be done in year 2 of any term. And it's something that I think is an opportunity to move us forward, to allow bills to move forward, to allow members to get a better reading of what their bill, how people feel about their bill, just give us a sense of movement. I think that for the 12 years that I've been in here, in a committee we'll hear hundreds of bills, and yet very few get voted out, and it's only at the very end. And this is a way to kind of spread that work out and give us, as people who represent 15,000 people, the opportunity to do so more effectively and completely. I'm happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions for Representative Tanzi? Representative Corvasi.
Representative Tanzi, respectfully, I can understand what you're trying to do. The intent is to decrease a logjam and to expedite pieces of legislation. But in so doing, in a sense, those 3 bills that you're signifying would actually be circumventing the legislative process, because the sub-A's would not go through the chair. Am I correct?
That's correct. They would go through Leg Council.
But they would not go through the chair.
No, and they would be reflective of the committee hearing.
But it would not be worked. It would not be worked on by the chair.
No.
Okay. So that, in a sense, is problematic because it sort of circumvents the entire process. Again, I understand the altruistic motivations that you have, but I think that that kind of flies in the face of the entire legislative process.
I couldn't disagree with you more respectfully, Arthur, or Representative Corvasi, simply because it gets a second hearing. And it doesn't necessitate a passage of that bill. It doesn't necessitate anything. And should it circumvent, as you say, I say, move more freely and get to that hearing, it doesn't mean, again, that it is ever going to make it to the floor. So we're not circumventing any...
But it makes it to the committee through a process that's separate and apart from the present process that we have the rules here for.
And I'm not saying that this can no longer be gone through the chair. I just want we as members to have the opportunity to create our own sub-As. Let's be transparent about this. Quite oftentimes, my very own bills will come out sub-A'd. I didn't write the sub-A. I have no say in what the sub-A says. Someone explains to me what the sub-A on my own bill is. Oftentimes just moments before it's heard in the committee. So I'm trying to open this process up, allow actually for more participation from the committee, and give them that kind of second reading, so that this is more of a full committee process. So while you feel it takes away, power or responsibility from the chair, I feel like it empowers the members of the committee. It empowers the members of the body and the chamber to fully represent what it is they came. I think that this logjam is a disservice, quite honestly, and it may be a burden on the chair, of someone such as Judiciary or Health, Education, and Welfare. They simply cannot be involved in hundreds of bills going through their committee in every single one. As was stated earlier, most of us have daytime jobs. There are constraints to the activities of people in each and every level, and this is not a way to go around those processes. This is simply a way to enable individuals to more collectively come to a conclusion and potentially move a bill forward. And again, nothing is ordered to the floor. Just because you put in a sub-A doesn't mean that it's going to be passed. These are all things that, again, just give us in our roles and our time we spend on the committees more of an opportunity to partake in the discussion and the process.
Thank you, Representative Tansey.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Representative Phillips.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm, in all honesty, confused on Section 2 that you're saying. Require the committee to conduct a vote on whether the bill may be sent to the House floor for a vote at the request of the bill's sponsor. Any bill voted out of committee pursuant to this subsection may be held and be subject to placement on the floor calendar by the chair. So if I'm reading it correctly, which I'm not sure I am, because as I said, I'm pretty much confused on this. The committee holds a second hearing. You get a vote on it because it says require the committee to conduct a vote on the sub-A. And then if it passes out of the committee, it doesn't necessarily have to go to the floor. So it dies right there anyways.
There are two separate flows. So one would be the sub-A, where there would be a second hearing, and the vote is a separate lane, we'll call it. And so if you're asking for a vote to be held in the committee, and the language is a little thick, I'll say.
Okay.
But as I sat and spent time with Council, with Danica, with Leader Blazajewski, trying to express these, and the intent of the bill is that lane 2 is we ask for a vote. And that also helps leadership to understand what the feel is for these bills. They similarly have an enormous process at the end of the session to determine what bills get passed. And if they know that the committee has voted with recommendation of the chair, then that goes directly to the floor. They know that if something gets voted out of the committee with recommendation of the committee, then they get to maybe give that bill a second look. and it kind of just elevates it, to out of, what's the place between heaven and hell?
Purgatory, yeah.
It elevates it out of purgatory and kind of gives it hope that it'll get someone's eye, because thousands of bills, and each year it's hard. I mean, we all have bills that we know should pass each year. There are bills that don't cost a dime, that would harm nobody, that are, I have one that I raised, like a simple example. This would have actually brought money into the state. It was gross vehicle weight, could not have personalized license plates on it. And there was literally no reason. DMV had no problem with this bill. I put it in for 5 years. The state could have been making money off of these vanity plates. And every single year, whatever speaker it was, and it was several different speakers, said to me, I didn't even know that this bill was on the radar. Now, something like that could easily be passed out, or, passed out of committee. And then the leadership has the opportunity to look among those bills for the ones that they want to elevate. I just think that it's an opportunity to really, bring maybe some of even the more mundane bills that we've heard year after year after year, kind of elevate them and give them the opportunity to come to light.
Okay, as I said, I've read that and I would read it again and
I
I
would
read it
strike
again and
I would strike the original
I have
part
to
of
admit,
it.
I'm confused.
Well, did my explanation make sense? Because we can alter the language.
I wouldn't even be able to start giving you a suggestion how to alter the language.
We would just strike that first
the
part.
way it's written, to me, it seems like even if this committee votes it out onto the floor, it doesn't necessarily have to hit the floor. It can be held right then and there.
It's voted out of committee, and it's not necessarily onto the floor. We know that those things are always determined by leadership, in consultation with the chairs. So there will be bills that are passed through, the original lane, which will directly place them on the floor. This will create a lane for us to go slightly above purgatory and enter, with a little more sunlight and a lot less noise to gain the attention.
Okay. As I said, I couldn't give you any idea as how to amend this one, so.
I think we can make it more clear.
Okay. Thank you,
Okay.
Madam Chair.
No problem. Any other questions? No? Thank you, Representative Tansey. And I see that we have John Marion from Common Cause, Rhode Island, as pro the bill. If John would like to come up and speak.
Thank you again, Chairwoman, members of the committee. I signed up pro in support of the concept. I do think that the bill as written, would present a number of challenges. The general point in what we support is the idea that more legislation get votes on the merits here. When you started this hearing, you read a statement about how the vote for hold for further study is not a vote on the merits of the bill. And I understand, why you read that statement and the chairs read that statement in the building. It's because you've received a lot of criticism based on the misunderstanding that the hold for further study is a vote on the merits. What we support as an organization is that there be more votes on the merits. And I think if you look across the country, there's a continuum in legislatures, right? For those of you who are familiar with New Hampshire, every bill gets a floor vote in the state of New Hampshire, right? It's quite a sight. I'm not endorsing that. But we are at the other end of that continuum, which is that virtually no votes come to the floor unless the leadership knows that they're going to pass on the floor. And it's helpful for our democracy. I think it's healthy for our democracy if votes that aren't necessarily going to pass get up or down votes. Because, a lot of people get frustrated by seeing, as Representative Tansey said, sort of bills get bottled up for years and years. There are advocates on bills from a variety of subjects in the building who have said, listen, I think I have enough votes, but I'm just never going to get a vote. And so that's the concept we support. Whether this is the way to do that, I think, is debatable as you've debated. So we'd like to see some progress toward more votes on the merits in committee in particular. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Are there any questions for Mr. Marion? No, hearing none.
Thank
you
you.
very much. Appreciate your testimony. And that will close the hearing on House Bill 5137. And next, we will move back to Representative Kennedy's bill, which is going to sound very familiar to another bill by Representative Newberry that we'll do right after this. But House Bill 5130 is a resolution that would amend the House rules to use electronic voting system to electronically record any member seconding a motion when multiple members second a motion. Representative Kennedy.
So, if you recall, a couple of years ago, when we were actually conducting our legislative sessions at the Vets Auditorium, we all had iPads at our seats, and one of the things that Speaker Shekarchi relied on at that time was the ability to push a button on the iPad in order to record those who were looking to second. When we returned to the House chambers last year, we actually went back to recording all of the seconds by having people stand. But as you can imagine, as we got closer to the end of the session, it does slow down the process quite a bit when we in fact have to have Speaker Shekarchi call on every member. And you may also recall that former Representative Anastasia Williams was not happy about that. She felt that all votes or all seconds should be recorded. So when Speaker Shekarchi was actually saying seconded by Leader Blazczewski and many others, some people who might have had a local piece of legislation that affected their particular community had to go up to the clerk in front, to Diana, and ask that their name be included in that list for seconds. So this represents an easy way to address that particular process. We do not have to add a new button onto the buttons that we already have at our desk. All it would do is when the speaker calls for seconds, rather than have people stand up, the speaker would say, all those who would like to second this bill or resolution, please signify by voting green on the electronic voting. The machine would be open. People would have, a number of seconds to record that. And at the end of that process, rather than the speaker having to go around the entire chamber if in fact everybody wants to second something, this becomes a much easier process. Physically, it means that the speaker doesn't have to wear out his voice going around the room. And at the same time, you have an electronic record now of all those people who do want to be recorded as seconding that particular bill or resolution. So I see this as being a much easier process, and it's similar to the process that we had when we were over at the Veterans Auditorium.
Okay. Thank you, Representative Kennedy. Excuse me. Any questions? Leader Chippendale.
Thank you, Chair. To both of these bills, the intent is fantastic. I've always been a little fascinated by the desire to second so many bills. I mean, we're demonstrating that we support it with our vote. I'm not sure what the second actually does, but in either one of these cases, I think this will streamline what we do, particularly at the end of the session or during a budget, and that will lend to the sanity of the entire room. So I think this is a fantastic initiative. Thank you.
Okay.
Just a quick comment.
Sure.
I think it's a great idea.
Okay.
I feel bad for the speaker when he's got to go around the whole room and there's 60 people seconding something, so this is a great idea.
Okay.
Or even when I'm presiding and Representative Kazirian decides that she's going to stand up with the others in the back row.
Last minute always.
Yeah. Any other questions for Representative Kennedy? No? Hearing none, I will close the hearing on House Bill 5130. And I'm going to introduce House Bill 5132, and this is a House resolution that also from Representative Newberry, excuse me, and this is also amending the rules for electronic recording of members seconding a motion or an action when there are more than 5 members seconding the motion or an action. So Representative Newberry.
No reason to beat the dead horse. We didn't consult before submitting effectively the same bill, so.
Yeah, okay.
Let's pretend the last hearing covered this one.
Yeah. Okay. So any questions for Representative Newberry? I may have to throw that out there. No? Hearing none, we're going to close the hearing on House Bill 5132. Next, we're going to stick with Representative Newberry for the rest of the remainder of our hearings. And we're going to do House Bill 5133. And this is requires that all grants allocated to the Senate be distributed in accordance with the rules of the Senate, and that all legislative grants allocated to the House of Representatives be divided equally among the 75 legislative districts. Representative Newberry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So one of the things about this committee that's interesting is that everybody here has been in this chamber for a while. In fact, it was like 3 of us have been here. There's only 3 of us who have not been in at least 6 terms or more. So I think you're all familiar with the fact that I hate the legislative grant program. I think it should be abolished philosophically. I don't like it. But I understand it's just not going to be abolished. So I'm trying to look for ways to make it more neutral. The reason I don't like the program, by the way, is not for some of the reasons that certain radio talk show hosts don't like it or members of the public don't like it. I don't think it's as nefarious as some people think it is. I just don't like it because I see it as a way for any incumbent legislator, Democrat or Republican, doesn't matter, to get a boost by giving out taxpayer money. That's why I don't like it. I don't have a problem with people taking advantage of it. Most people do. Most of my colleagues do on both parties, and that's fine. But I don't like the fact, and we've all seen instances here over the years where certain individual legislators will get favored for various reasons. They have a tough reelection. I remember, I'm not going to get specifics, but I do remember one particular legislator one year who received well over $100,000 in grants right in the months leading up to a reelection, which they lost, but that's beside the point. If we're going to do this program, we should make it as neutral as possible. And the other thing is, over the years, the amount of money, I know, Rep. Kennedy, you've been here for many, many years, Rep. Corvasi, I know I wasn't here, but I've been told back in the 90s when money was flowing freely, the amount of money in legislative grants was really, really significant. Nowadays, if you look at the total grant and the appropriations, it's $1 million, $2 million total, which is real money, but divvied up, it's not as much as it used to be. I just simply think this should be given out in equal installments to every single member. And again, I think the grant should be approved by somebody. You don't want someone giving out cash to their best buddy. I have no problem with the speaker or whoever you want to designate having to sign off on a grant. What I don't want to see is one member get $50,000 while another member gets $5,000. I don't think any of us think that's a good system. The reason I divvy this up between the Senate and the House, incidentally, is we can't control what the Senate does. The budget appropriation process gives the Senate a certain amount. They can do what they want to. I can't control that. But we can't control what we do in the House. I just think this is the right and fair thing to do. That's all. And if it's going to be done, it has to be in the rules. It's not something we do in statute. It should be put in the rules. So that's my pitch on that. I'd like to see it adopted. There we go.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions regarding this legislation? Oh, sorry. Representative Zerpa?
I actually do, Representative Newberry. So if we were to divide an amount by 75, and you indicated that you don't take them, so we're already down to 74, and, you know,
Actually, I would take them if it was divvied up evenly.
Oh. You would?
I would.
Okay, so like, what do you think is the amount we would divide up by 5? Like, everybody would get 10,000, 5,000, 3,000?
Well, every year, to answer your question, every year in the budget's a line item. It's actually not a line item. It's part of the JCLS budget. But every year, there's a certain amount of money that is allocated by the Speaker and the Senate President. It's a little bit opaque. But there's a certain amount of money that is allocated every year to legislative grants. But the Speaker determines ultimately how that's allocated among the different members in the different districts. This rule would constrain the Speaker to allocate it equally. And if somebody, for whatever reason, did not want to take their district's allocated amount, you would divide it up by 74, divide it into 74 parts. It's like think of it as a pie. Right now there's 75 parts. If 2 people say they don't want to do it for whatever reasons, make it 73, that kind of thing. I just think it should be equal. I don't think it should be as political. I don't think it's as political as people think it is, but it's still political. It's just political in a different way than most people see. It's a way for some people to get a boost at election time, and I just don't think that's right. I think it benefits anybody at election time. The fact that one rep may get $10,000 and another rep gets $50,000, nobody in the public knows that, but it's not right. It's just not right. We shouldn't do it that way.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions? No? Okay. Hearing none, then I will close the hearing on House Bill 5132. Next is House Bill, oh, wait a minute, that's a legislative grant. That was closing it on 5133. Now we're going to go on to House Bill 5134 by Representative Newberry, and this would permit any committee member to hold a substitute bill which is moved for consideration for a period of 24 hours. Representative Newberry.
So a few years back, we made, I thought, a very good change to the rules. When I first came here, up until we made this rule change, I think it was 4 years ago, bills would come to a committee that have a hearing, they'd typically be held for further study, and then when they came back for a vote, a sub-A would be often, not always, but usually be a sub-A. And sometimes the sub-As were simple and easy. Sometimes they were very complex. So we changed the rules that any sub-A has to be posted 24 hours in advance online. So that way the members of the public, committee members, lobbyists, anybody who has an interest in the bill at least gets 24 hours notice as to what the changes are going to be in case they're particularly important. That was a good change. But even with that change, there are still pieces of legislation where you can read it, and I think of like environmental regulatory bills, bills that come out of corporate. I'm looking at Representative Kennedy nodding his head. I cannot tell you how many times I have sat on the floor or not in the committee, I've never been on corporations, but read legislation on the corporations. It's not easy to understand without an explanation. It's not a lot of bills that this happens with, but there are bills that are so complex that just any of us cannot really get the sub-A version until someone explains it. So if that's going to happen, even though it's been posted 24 hours in advance, you get to the committee, I still would prefer not to be in the situation of having to vote up or down on a bill that I just heard the full explanation on. And this would allow, if you read it, I believe it allows 1/3 of a committee, at the request you have a vote, to hold the bill just for another 24 hours. It's just another way of providing transparency to the public and making sure that anybody who votes on a bill in committee at least has been given plenty of time to fully understand what they're voting on. That's all. And I don't think it would come up that much. I don't think this would actually be enacted very often. I'm thinking the handful of bills that I've seen that have come as sub-As before committees I've been on where I would like to have more time is very, very limited. But there are occasions, particularly the heavy regulatory stuff, where I think it's appropriate.
Okay, any questions? Representative Corvasi.
Representative Newberry, let's take a step back. Right now, if there's a substantive change, it's a 24-hour hold. Okay, because if it's something that's a typo or what have you,
there's no hold,
I
right.
don't think that applies.
Right.
So now, in addition to that, so that's going to stay the same. Now, in addition to that, you have another process by which the bill is going to be held?
Well, let me
in addition to that 24?
Yeah, but there's a reason for it. And I'll give you an example. We all come from different backgrounds, right? There are bills, because of my background, I can read and understand very easily. And there's other bills that I have to really have explained to me. And that's true of all of us. So, for example, I'm going to use Rep. Kennedy because he's sitting across from me. He's been involved in insurance regulation for years and years and years. I bet you an insurance regulatory bill can come before you, whether you're the chair of the committee or not, and you can read a sub-A online and understand it, whereas I'm not going to. Versus my background's in law. I can read criminal, civil statutes, and I can understand them where other people say, I don't know what it's about, because it's not their background. So you may have a bill come, you can read 24 hours in advance and understand. I may get to the committee even having read the bill, but not having time to have it explained or understand it, where I still, maybe I like the bill. It's not about whether the bills are good or bad. I feel uncomfortable casting a vote in committee on a bill that I just fully learned to understand right then and there. And Rep. Corvasi, I don't think this would come up that often. I really don't. I would, if people abused it, we could always change the rule. You know what I'm saying? But I don't think this is something that's going to be abused. I think in the right situation, and again, it requires 1/3 of the committee to do it too. One person can make the request, and then 1/3 of the committee has to vote. So it's only going to happen when there's a group of a committee, given the numbers in this chamber to be bipartisan, that would say, wait, can we have another 24 hours just to look at this? I don't think that's unreasonable.
And I get what you're getting at, but the only thing I'm stumbling over is the fact that we're putting another, respectfully, whether it's for a good reason or not, sort of another impediment to the flow of the legislative process. I understand why you're doing it.
Yeah, we are.
I think that's something we have to consider when we're considering this particular bill of yours.
No, that's a fair point, but that just means we need to get bills submitted earlier, heard earlier. You know, that we collectively, we can control that. And frankly, we've done a good job. You know, we changed the rules the first time around. I mean, we put the 24-hour thing in. If you talk to the different legal counsel, they like it. I mean, things have gotten a lot. We've both been here a long time. This chamber runs a lot more smoothly, and I give the staff the credit for that, all credit. It runs a lot more smoothly than it did, say, 10 years ago.
Yeah, I just, if I can respond, sorry.
Ariana, go ahead.
I would agree. I think when I first came here 10 years ago, it was we did a lot of things at the end, and I see us really working our way towards doing a lot more in the middle. I also think we really can't discount the committee process. I mean, we sit and listen to the bills, we try to make them better. But yeah, I would say we were doing a lot less like late into the session, which is good. It's good to see that trend.
Representative Place.
Just to Representative Corvasi's comments about impeding the legislative process, I'd have to ask, what's a greater impediment to the legislative process? Asking someone on a committee to vote on something they don't understand? I mean, I think that does a disservice to the members of the committee if they can't, and it's no fault of their own because of the complexity of the issue. You're asking them to possibly vote on something they don't understand. I think it's fair to the committee person and the people they represent that they have that ability to soak in that explanation over, I think a 24-hour time frame is a reasonable time.
May I?
Representative Corvasi, yes.
Keep in mind that the responsibility we have as legislators, okay, whether that responsibility is actually acted upon or not, is when we have a substantive change and we have that first 24 hours, it's incumbent upon us to do our due diligence to determine what the changes are. And yes, there are things that are more difficult to digest than others, but we already have that 24 hours in place where we have to do our due diligence. And shame on us if we're not prepared after that 24 hours is up.
And I agree with you to a certain point, but you also know if you talk to any one lawyer, any two lawyers, you're going to get a different opinion on things. So while I may do my due diligence and approach, my in-house counsel, the counsel who's actually worked on the legislation may actually have a different opinion as I'm sitting there in the committee at the time, which would change my perspective on the legislation. And again, I did do my due diligence, but again, you ask any two qualified lawyers, you may get a completely different answer as you've experienced yourself.
So let me say this, you could get that at the end of 24 hours, you could get that at the end of 48 hours, you can get that at the end of 72 hours. At some point, you have to fish or cut bait.
I was just going to say that.
And this is 24, and we made a decision, like any other piece of legislation, at 24 hours. And after 24 hours, like you said, fish or cut bait.
Leader Chippendale.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This definitely, I think, adds quality to the process. And I have seen in the past immediate session where bills, and there was no malice, but it was such a complex issue that as it was being amended, even when introduced to the committee, the counsel for that committee admitted, they've retired since then, they admitted that they simply didn't have a thorough understanding of it because it had happened so quick. There were so many bills that were going through that committee at the time. It's just the nature of how the process flows. And again, I don't think anyone was acting in malice. It was the sheer volume and the ability of, in the context of an extremely complicated topic, to absorb a substantial change to the bill. I think asking for 24 hours is not a heavy ask. An additional cooling off period of 24 hours is not a heavy ask. And towards the end of session where there may be log jams that this could potentially extend us another day beyond when we want to, we have the ability to address the rules on an individual basis. And if there's a consensus that the rule should be waived on one, we could do that. I don't view this as an impediment. I view this as a quality control element. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative Zerpa.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Representative Newberry, I don't necessarily think that this is a bad idea, but you mentioned corporations, and I know that subject matter can get pretty meaty. And when there is a substantive amendment, it's been my experience that the attorneys do a pretty good job of explaining the amendment, and I ask for plenty of explanations. And then on the floor, I have noticed that even, no matter which side, we'll ask the floor manager or the chairman of the committee, chairwoman of the committee, to explain the bill. I noticed that even they will kind of be uncertain, and legal counsel will assist them. So, I don't know. Like I said, it's not a bad idea, but I do think there's opportunity, and like in committee, you could, say, let's pick on corporations, and then go back and ask your legal counsel, well, this is how the lawyer there explained the amendment. Mr. Riley, what do you think? I know, so there's two opportunities. I don't know, I'm just kind of thinking out loud of the flow of things. And then the floor is a third opportunity from maybe one of the attorneys who sits along the wall or an attorney for that committee. So I don't know. I just think there is opportunity, and I've been confused plenty, believe me.
There is. Just remember something. I think some of the unstated concern maybe that people might use this to gum up the works. I don't think this would come up or be used very often, but I think the times that it might be used are good times to do it. It still requires a certain, if I have, my screen just went blank, I know my intent. I think it still says one person can make the request, but there's supposed to be a third of the committee has to agree. That means you have to have at least a third of the committee who are concerned enough that they really want to think about it. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Kazirian.
How would this work with the 48-hour posting process?
We could change, first of all, if you guys were to adopt this, it would come into as a sub A, right? So we could change it so we could allow the committee to have a meeting 24 hours later on that particular bill. So that's how I would solve that. Because I know what you're saying. I don't want to have it held by this and have another 48 hours.
Exactly.
I'm not asking for that.
Yeah.
But we could schedule a hearing just with that agenda. That'd be my answer to that. It's a fair point, though.
Yeah.
Very good point. Good point. Is there anybody else? Any other questions for Representative Newberry? Okay, hearing none. I am going to close the hearing on House Bill 5134, and we're going to move on to House Bill 5135. And this resolution will require the clerk of the House to prepare and publish the House Journal an index of all rulings made by the Speaker. Representative Newberry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're going to hold hear this in conjunction with 5136
Oh, that's
as well,
right.
which are the last two resolutions.
I did have that, and we'll also put this into play 5136, and that is for the clerk to publish information regarding decisions made by the Speaker and appeals by members to the decisions. So
both of these resolutions originated as floor amendments. I don't think were actually introduced 2 years ago that former Leader Phillips drafted up. I will explain the concept because I don't think either one is well drafted, but I like the idea. And again, if this were something to be adopted, I imagine it'd be a sub A. I was thinking about why we have a journal to have a record of proceedings. That's why we have a journal. And yes, we have the videotape now, which we didn't have 10 years ago. I mean, now if you want to go watch the video, you can do that, but watching video is time-consuming and cumbersome. So if you have the journal and we print the text of amendments and the text of legislation, all that we put in the journal, we do have many rulings from the Speaker's rostrum. My intent is not, and I think the way this is worded doesn't say this, my intent is not to have a recording of every ruling the Speaker makes. There are a lot of rulings the Speaker's called on to make in the course of it, especially later in the session, that aren't even controversial. You have to make a ruling, that's fine. Once in a while, and this is my real intent, once in a while there's a vote. Someone challenges the ruling of the chair. And I believe that if someone challenges the ruling of the chair, the journal should contain a brief explanation of what that ruling was and the rationale for the Speaker's ruling. It could be a few lines. And because we have the video, it's not cumbersome for the clerk. The clerk can do it after the fact, look at the video, and just put in a few line explanation. The reason is this. People who are trying to track what happened in this chamber, and I know some are sitting in this room or watching on TV, and some of the advocacy groups and watchdog groups, they're not going to watch the whole video. They're going to go to the journal first. Oh, what happened back on that day? And if they see something in a journal and they have a brief explanation, they at least know what happened. They know what it's worth looking into. So I think it's a relatively simple change. I think, what are the number of times the Speaker's ruling gets challenged in a given year? 5, 6 maybe? It's not that often. I just want to see an explanation in the journal of what the ruling was. That's all.
Okay, are there any questions for Representative Newberry? Leader Chippendale.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is an extremely critical improvement to the rules. We oftentimes, because we live in this world, we live and breathe, Mason's rules of parliamentary procedure. So to us, we know what's going on. The casual viewer, observer at home or in the gallery doesn't necessarily have that intimate familiarity with the process. And even as was pointed out by my esteemed colleague, going back into the journal doesn't offer them any relief to that quandary in their head, like what just happened. I think that does a great disservice to the honor of our body, because it appears to them, whether it's accurate or not, it appears that we're operating under a veil of a certain veil of secrecy, because it's never explained, and they wonder what just happened. We don't know. That does damage, I think, to the reputation of the House. I think that does damage to the democratic process that we engage in the House. And I don't think that this is really much to ask, because we do record some things in the journal that are excruciatingly detailed, where in folks' opinions they may not have to be. But this is so important because it is part of the process, and it confuses the observers at home or in the gallery, as I said. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Again, any other questions for Representative Newberry? Okay, hearing none. I'm going to close the hearing on House Bills 5135 and 5136. And with that, we have cleared our agenda, and I will look for a motion to adjourn. Okay, thank you. We are adjourned.